Hello and welcome back to the Agents Unleashed podcast, the show that helps you to sort the signal from the noise in the fast-paced world of agentic AI. I'm your host, Thomas Maybrier, and I'm the digital media producer for Valory, one of the core contributors to OLIS. If you haven't heard of OLIS or you haven't heard of Agents Unleashed, before we start the show, I'll tell you quickly a little bit about both. So OLIS is the best way for anyone to own and monetize their AI agent, and that includes people just like you. You can learn more about how to do that at olis.network. And Agents Unleashed isn't just a podcast, it's also the premier event series for people interested in agentic AI. Events have been held all over the world with over 77 speakers and presenters and more than 2,500 in-person attendees. The next event has recently been announced. It'll be held June 30th in Cannes. To find out more about the event, including how to RSVP, you can head to the link in the show notes or the description box if you're watching on YouTube. On today's show, I'm joined by David Attermann, who is the head of Web3 Investments at M31 Capital. David brings a sharp and focused investor's perspective shaped by years in traditional finance and infrastructure. In this conversation, we talk about what makes AI agents more powerful on Web3 rails, from verifiable privacy to a more composable internet, and what most of Web2 still doesn't realize about the edge Web3 provides. I had a great time talking to David, and I definitely learned a lot. I'm sure you will too. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with David Attermann. Please introduce yourself. So give me your name. What are you working on?
I'm David Attermann. I'm head of Web3 Investments at M31 Capital. I run both the liquid and illiquid investment strategies focused a lot on infrastructure. And so naturally, have been in and around the AI space for a while. And, given how broad the use cases of the technology are, it's been kind of the key aspect of most of the new investments we look at. Should I go into my background?
Yeah, that's actually my next question is about your background. And how do you think what you were doing before informs how you approach what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I started my career in traditional finance. I spent a decade across banking, private equity, hedge fund type roles, focused on the Web2 networking infrastructure sector. And so it was through that lens that I actually got interested in Bitcoin and blockchain. Initially in 2014, saw it as disruptive technology to data networking and kind of understood the difference and the advantages of these decentralized networks and what you could build on top of them and how they would be unique and valuable versus the legacy systems that I had been covering. And so kind of followed along, invested on my own, didn't go full-time into the industry until early 2021. I launched M31 Capital, which was a liquid token fund focused on infrastructure and middleware protocols, and ran that for 3 years and was looking for scale. And so ended up merging with M31 at the end of 2023 and have kind of taken over the liquid fund covering Web3, as well as leading the venture efforts, which given my focus has been mainly Web3 AI, some infrastructure and the like. So, I do both liquid and illiquid, very hands-on, very synergistic within the portfolio. And yeah, I've been here for a year and a half. It's been great.
Cool. So you mentioned seeing the advantages of the blockchain approach. What were those advantages then and what are they now? Have they changed over the past couple of years?
I think they've gotten more defined. For the longest time, I kind of, you look at DeFi and it completely changed what's possible with finance. And I kind of saw the same thing for, the rest of the internet, the rest of data networking, composable compute, composable data. And it was very hard to articulate, but kind of having novel functionality that was obviously really valuable with financial assets, with DeFi, and, kind of I hate the term, but opening up the design space in terms of what you could build for applications, for software, for how networking works. And then there's always the security piece. Centralized systems are extremely insecure, and it all stems generally from a single point of failure. And so we spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year on cybersecurity. There's always a breakthrough on firewalls and ways to manage access, and yet every day there's a huge breach into a huge valuable database, Social Security information in the US, United Healthcare, AT&T, Coinbase, obviously. Most recently, the US government has been hacked. I think China is has accessed and is allegedly waiting within our infrastructure to attack. And so, the most vital kind of pieces of the government and our, national infrastructure are kind of obsolete and just structurally insecure. And so having data be accessed by private key and having, you can still obviously, put a gun to my head and take my private key and you can take my data, but you can't take everyone else's. And so I always thought that made sense. As someone who covered cybersecurity, it was like, why are we spending all this money? It doesn't work. People find ways around, and it's because of the structural, the way it's built and access the single point of failure that it didn't matter what you kind of built on top of it. You kind of had to restructure it, and so that was kind of the overall theme, and it became, I think, a lot more clear with the introduction of AI agents. Actually, I had been very focused on ZK co-processing in general, accessing off-chain resources, verifying them and bringing them on-chain, kind of, beefing up putting your smart contracts on steroids. And, no one really understood why you'd want to verify an inference, that people would tell me all the time. I go on ChatGPT, I get an answer. I don't really care to verify it. And that's completely missing the point. And it became clear when you had autonomous agents, the first kind of generation. They didn't do much, but they were kind of fun chatbots on Twitter that, were pretty funny, pretty knowledgeable sometimes. And then they started to kind of acquire financial assets and have their own wallet. And then the question became, okay, is it actually autonomous, or is there a dev behind it, coming up with what they're saying, or intervening? And then do they have access to the wallet? And so it kind of clicked for people why you need to verify that it's actually a closed system. Private, the first iteration is really verified through TEEs, and so you get confidentiality, you get security, and you can verify that on chain. And so it kind of clicked for people. Why it's necessary, why these different pieces of off-chain infrastructure, on-chain with the wallet, that composability. People started to kind of, and I started to kind of think of what was possible building on top of those kind of themes. And so I think the composability aspect and the security aspect have stayed kind of the general advantages of Web3, but now that we have actual use cases, examples, tangible technology that people can understand, it's become a lot more clear, the value. Not 100% clear yet, unfortunately, but the knowledge of the market has definitely perked up to why you would need Web3 or blockchain orchestrated networking.
Yeah, I think that very much rhymes with the approach and attitude that Valory has always had about it. And especially recently when LLMs became I wouldn't say they're commodities yet, but in my opinion, that's the direction that we're trending in. If you think through, as you said, some of the design spaces, it becomes obvious that having an ownership layer of the value could be potentially maybe more valuable than the model below it. And how do you give the ownership to the person running the agent, and then also, as you're saying, verify that the agent does what it says it does? I mean, we always say trust minimize, not trust less, because you give the agent a safe and then a smart account, and the agent is able to act on your behalf. And then, as you said, you have this transparency layer where you can go and see what it does. But when you interact with AI and from the more centralized players, when I was comparing some of the first round of trendy AI agents in Web3 on an earlier episode, I mentioned, and I think this is what you were talking about, I think it was Truth Terminal. When it first started really popping off, there was this question about, how autonomous is the generation of the written content. But I think that's all just growing pains of figuring out where these agents work, because in my opinion, and I think this is kind of the Valory position as well, the most useful AI agent is one that you rarely interact with. It knows what it's meant to do for you, and you don't have to put as much trust in it. It just delivers outcomes to you, whether that's an outcome to you as the end user, or as a developer, or as a project launching an entire economy of it. The chat model where you're going back and forth and you do have these questions about where does this output come from? That's all interesting, but the ownership layer, you can do something really, really, really interesting in between those two ends. I wonder if you've thought about any of this.
No, yeah, it's actually, I was going to interrupt you, but I'm glad that I let you finish because I always say the value of AI or AI is only as valuable as the context and kind of access that you give it, right? So, a chatbot is cool, but, one that is monitoring my healthcare, or my vitals, my healthcare history, knows what I'm eating and can, monitor, maybe my body, identify something before it becomes serious, give me, insight into, how I should be eating, how I should be, sleeping, all that stuff, doing something on my behalf. It will need access to my identification, will need access to my financial assets if I wanted to, build something or buy something or do most things, especially in Web3 where you need gas, the key advantage, in my opinion, of Web3 AI over Web2 AI is that you give agents a lot more autonomy. And what I mean by that is, all the issues with Web2 kind of network architecture, you can plug in an agent, with APIs into most things. I think you can get an MCP server that has, hundreds of API plugins, but it's, there's access, but there's not really autonomy because you still need to be telling it what to do, and you need to give access to, if it's Stripe, you need to give access. You need to have a KYC and all this stuff. But on Web3 rails, the buzzwords permissionlessness and trustlessness, which aren't words, but we use, they were kind of ideologies, and now it's kind of prerequisite for autonomy within Web3, within AI agents, right? So taking a step back, Web2 is like human native, whereas Web3 is agent or software native. And so, APIs are set up by humans and companies and all that. Whereas in Web3, the APIs are the connections between different, my agent and buying data from Demo or GPUs from, IONET, or bandwidth, or all of these DeepIn products, which are basically tokenized resources. The agent can basically, I give it a prompt, kind of like an intent. I say, here's $5,000, make me 50 grand, and it can obviously search the internet, figure out, do its own analysis, figure out what to do. But then it can act on it, right? It can have its own wallet. It can pay for generative video from LivePeer, take that and maybe some IP from Sonium, and make a movie that it can sell, receive the proceeds, and then send it back to me. I have no idea what it's doing. And so the human interaction or need to kind of interfere or intervene is minimized with Web3 Rails, where it just gives the agent, I don't want to say agency because but more autonomy than it could ever have in Web2. It, theoretically can do it securely and privately, if systems are kind of designed correctly, in which you can verify. And so, I'm confident that it's not stealing my $5,000 because I can, kind of monitor it, and I know how it's set up and all that. And so it really opens up what the freedom, I guess, of AI agents, which maximizes what the value that they can bring their owner or partner, whatever we want to call them.
Yeah, right. Because that's something that I think maybe it's not unique to Web3, but that Web3 does really well is the game theory of different interactions. Like in a well set up system, all of the different actors are incentivized to provide accurate and true information rather than like you think through all of these loopholes and you build the architecture around getting all of the incentives right. And so you can minimize trust in that way. And that's something that I think is, if not unique, definitely a strength of Web3. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing.
No, yeah, definitely. There are many ways to set it up, right? You can have economic incentives. You can have staking with, you can have consensus with, 4, even though it's expensive, with like 4 different GPUs, and that kind of lowers the probability and it increases the cost of doing something malicious. And then with ZK, FHE, and these cryptographic type measures, which are ultimately backed by some sort of economic security. But there are ways to set it up, and it's all game theory. But which is why trust minimize is the right term, because you can never eliminate risk completely, but you can be 99.9% certain, again, if it's designed well. And so it's not, most hacks that you see in like DeFi, it's because of a bad design or a bug in the code. It's not like an inherent, and especially in TEE, which is a real misconception of its security. It's how you design it, just like anything else. You slap a TEE on something, it's not good to go. It's like it's a tool to create a system that is verifiable and private. And so agree. A lot of ways which makes it interesting and harder and all of that, but it opens up the amount of stuff you can do because you can connect to a lot more things.
Yeah, maybe that's a good way for my audience is somewhat I wouldn't say non-technical, but sometimes we can get a little lost in the weeds, those of us who work on this every day. And as you were speaking, I thought maybe a good analogy for this is like if you're hiring a contractor to put a fence around your house, they can have all of the correct components, but if they install the latch on the outside, you have all of the right things, but you needed to think through the design a little bit more.
Right, it's not the fence.
Yeah, it's how you think about it. The implementation details, again,
yes.
Always.
Exactly.
I'm curious about when would you say AI entered your daily life, and where do you find the most utility in it, like today?
So I assume you're referring to the ChatGPT generative AI era, right?
It could be anything,
Let's go with that, because a lot of things are technically AI, and you can get into the technicalities and all that. But I think daily. It wasn't until probably 2 months ago that I actually started to rely on ChatGPT, Perplexity for all of my productivity kind of activities. I don't know which upgrade. I don't remember which upgrade it was, but it got good enough that it was actually useful. I remember trying to use it for investment memos or emails, and it just wasn't there. It was helpful for some things, but not many. And I think about 2 months ago, I really started to use it every day, and now I can't really live without it, which is pretty crazy. And what do I use it mostly for? A lot on kind of document generation. At this point, it is pretty good at creating at least 90% of an investment memo, which is extremely helpful. Obviously helpful it's really good at actually developing a technical product roadmap, which is interesting, and kind of the steps and the implementation, because there's a lot you have to think about at once, right? How everything fits together, what the timing should be, how you should test it, and all of that. And it processes that very quickly. And so that's been very helpful. It's also very good at obviously summarizing, a lot of data and information at once. And so, I love giving it, 10 white papers and telling me to make a, competitive landscape, something that would have taken me probably a week or longer to make. It just does it. So I think of it as, Excel, but for language and ideas. And just think about the relationships and producing written language automatically, like Excel produces mathematical equations automatically.
Yeah, my usage is quite similar to that. My timetable is longer, but I would agree that maybe in the last 3 months, when I started to get more alternatives, I do use OpenAI's models quite a bit. But recently I've been using many DeepSeek. I find the Gemini models really useful. And I'm curious what you think about promise. I find that it's not great at coming up with interesting angles for creative work. So what about you? What's an area where you see promise, but it's not hitting for you just yet?
I will admit I have a Substack. I've tried to use it for Substack. Pretty busy and a lot going on, and it just doesn't work, unfortunately. And I think it's the way I think of it, at least today, it's more of a tool than a replacement for something. And so, maybe, definitely if I'm doing a Substack about, a protocol or an industry, the competitive landscape and all of that, definitely can use ChatGPT for that. But it still can't. I can feed it all my Substacks. It's still not good at or at least in my opinion, at like mimicking my tone and style. And then it's just not like fun to read. So I definitely agree on the creative side. It's not there yet. But as I said, it's more of a tool that you're doing. Again, it's just like human intervening. It's not really autonomous yet. And where it what I try to, I'm not an engineer, but obviously there's a lot of no code or low code tools out there. But what I'm focused on is like workflow automation and having everything that I use, all my productivity tools kind of connected and in sync, having a kind of like a universal view of my kind of professional life. And this is actually one of my portfolio companies, Centigen, is building this, where you have, it's one thing to like integrate with, as I said, with these MCP off the shelf products, but actually having an overall view to say, hey, based on your conversation from last month, this chat, this group chat that you archived because it was annoying you on Telegram, and this trend that I'm noticing on Twitter, like you should really take a look at this narrative. There's something that I would have never looked at, and maybe like auto-generate a report on it and say, hey, do you want to send this out to your LPs, like, as something that you're looking at, and having everything kind of read and write, but also just the full context, and then the ability to kind of come up with ideas, not me prompting it, just it knows the ultimate goal, which is, outperform and grow AUM, and then it figures out all the details in between that and can really, automate these workflows. And so obviously we're not there yet, but this is the vision of Centigen. It's kind of an autonomous business. Obviously there will always be an owner. If I'm not doing something, at least I own the system that's making money. But I absolutely see that as the future. Is it next year or 3 years? Like, I'm not sure. Probably I'll go with under 3 years. But it's kind of these step by step processes, and then unprompted kind of just understanding the situation, understanding your whole knowledge base, and coming up with ideas that you would have never thought of.
Yeah. I think right now you can kind of approximate something close to that by building custom versions of things, but the problem with that is you have to, like, I have a couple that I use for different purposes, and I'm always uploading PDFs of like, okay, here's the new spreadsheet with all the latest numbers. And if you forget that you haven't done that, it's still good, but it's lacking this context. So I think maybe where we might go next is being able to, as you say, like absorb that on its own. And also, I really liked what you said about looking at things that maybe you as the end user would have overlooked and bringing them to your attention. Getting that right, of course, will be really, really important, because I think from a UX perspective, the first time that it brings you something that's irrelevant, you're going to turn it off and say, don't recommend me, and then your end user is not going to get that value as it improves later.
Or even come back to me and say, hey, like, no one cares about outperformance. You should be focused more on marketing. You should change what your goal is that you told me to achieve, and here's why. And I'll be like, oh. And unfortunately, there's a little bit of truth to that. But yeah, no, it's really becoming this autonomous, like, not independent, but separate entity that can supplement, but also just like become a completely new source of. I was talking to a developer last night who is developing software for investment funds, and he was surprised to see, yes, it's automation of workflow that we do today, but it's also, I would do A, B, X, Y, and Z if I had the technical capabilities or time or whatever it is. And so it's like automating stuff you do today, but then ability to do more things that you would have never been able to do. So it's, additional kind of productivity.
Yeah, that's very much my experience of being augmented by these tools. Like, there are things that I know just enough to be dangerous, like I feel very fortunate that I live in the timeline where, like, I'm never going to have to learn to write good bash scripts. I can use them all the time, which now I do. But like, if I think back to maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, like I was writing bad scripts, and I would get into like trying to learn it. And I think, I just don't have the time for this. I'm not getting paid to to learn scripting. Now I don't have to. So I think we're going to see more and more of that like augmentation where you don't have to pick up necessarily every skill. You do need to be able to think through design like with at least a little bit of clarity. But yeah, even as they get better, like hopefully they'll start to, maybe if we find a way to have them be useful assistants, but without this like over agreement problem that that they have always had. Yeah, there's probably some really interesting spaces in there.
And that reminds me of like the narrative that developers are obsolete, and that because anyone's a developer. And I think it's like anything else. It's like it augments you. So a good developer will become 3 times as good, and maybe a bad developer will become a baseline developer. It's like, I'll bring it back to the Excel background example, but if I'm a really good they used to model on paper with graph paper and all that stuff, and if you're really good at that, you're probably going to be really good at Excel too, because all the concepts, what needs to be done, but you could just do 10 times more, right, with this automation. And if you're bad at modeling, like maybe Excel will help, but still you need to know how it can help you for it to be valuable. So I think there's I hate that narrative that developers will go obsolete. I think just like anything, if you don't use it, you're at a disadvantage. So that's the main thing. But still, if you're talented and ambitious or whatever, you can never you can never replace that.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you there. So this is the most important time to learn how to do this was yesterday. Second best is today.
Agreed.
I haven't asked at all about how you're looking at the space, from an investor perspective. I think it might be interesting for my audience to hear from an investor. You have a more 30,000-foot view of the space. What are you seeing, and what do you think that those of us who are just kind of consumers, what do you think we should know that you're seeing that maybe hasn't trickled down yet?
That's an interesting question. In terms of the first part of the question, what we kind of look for from an investment standpoint. I said my background's in infrastructure. We've built we've curated a full stack, infrastructure portfolio, and if you build it, they will come. Hasn't worked in Web3. I think it's pretty obvious at this point. And so what we've been seeking out is Web2 AI is demand. It is real businesses that have revenue, and they would love to save 80% on inference costs, right? It's their biggest overhead. And so it's kind of like taking the really valuable and unique Web3 infrastructure today and applying it to stuff that already exists. And so lowering costs. And so we've started to actually dip our toes into non-blockchain native. I hope my hope is in 2 years we don't say Web2, Web3, we just say AI. But it's really taking something, either making it cheaper and more scalable, or something like facial recognition or healthcare data, AI. It's really tricky with all the regulations and all the sideload systems. But with Web3 Rails, with verifiable and guaranteed privacy and security and custody over that data, you can do a lot more. And so it's kind of augmenting these more traditional or non-Web3 businesses with this Web3 tech. And so that's what we've been thinking about. That's what we look for in terms of upside, rather than this is cool, hopefully someone will build on it. That's just it hasn't worked, and I don't think it's we've seen plenty of projects just run out of time, right? You got to find something today, and maybe that is something in 3-5 years down the line, but you need to find kind of effective solutions today for the technology. And in terms of the trickle down, I think so. Okay, I think a couple things, and I think it's good that the end user won't actually know that that this is happening. But I think that most people would be surprised to see. So you have two things. You have real actual adoption and traction from Web3 AI infrastructure companies in Web2. I think people know the GPU stuff, but which is extremely early days. But on the security and privacy, one of our I'll shill my bag. I gotta. One of our portfolio companies, Super Protocol, which is a TEE based cloud infrastructure provider, has found insane product market fit with healthcare data companies, with any Web2 AI company that needs to compute over sensitive data, which you can't really do. You can't do from the public cloud. And so you see like companies that don't care about decentralization, crypto, probably have a negative view, if anything, on it, but they just care about, they can only get that functionality from these blockchain orchestrated systems. And that's real and already live today and only going to become the norm, I think. And the reason I think that is because you look at the Web2 side of things. You see Apple with their Apple Intelligence. All of the compute can't happen on device. Some of it can, but not all of it. And as we progress, we'll get better and better models. And anyway, there's always going to be a need to offload compute. And at their Apple Intelligence announcement, they said we can't do this in the cloud. The public cloud's a non-starter. And so they built their own cloud. It looks exactly like a blockchain orchestrated network. It's TEE based. Their private keys, all that stuff, and the only difference is, and they call it like they call it like a public ledger, something like that. And I thought it was blockchain, where they store the keys and they have the kind of transparency into everything that's happening, so you can make sure that your data is safe and all that, and that the computations are happening as planned. But they own and operate that ledger, and so they're like almost there. But you can see the design. Is exactly what Web3 AI is. They just need to get to the public blockchain aspect, and then you see Google Wallet, I think, is implementing ZK technology, again, not to be posted on a blockchain yet, but you see it starting to happen. Visa with their AI agent platform, the identity, I forget what they call it, tokenized passport for the so it's like tokenized identity, again, not on public chain. But so you see both sides kind of converging. And I think for me, it's been obvious for a long time, but it's always nice to see it actually happening. And so I think people should be and will be surprised at how prevalent Web2 AI will be leveraging blockchain technology.
Cool. Yeah, as a complement to existing systems to improve them, rather than maybe like a few years ago, more people expected the total replacement of like the old solution.
Although if something uses, if a company uses Super Protocol, does it become Web3? So maybe it's just a definition, but yeah, I think it converges, and maybe the infrastructure gets displaced, but I think the upper part of the stack can live in harmony with it.
Cool. Great answer. So I think we'll wrap it up here. Is there anything that you really want to mention, or something that you think is important we didn't touch on?
No, I mean, one of my, this is an AI focused crowd. One of my, main initiatives more recently has been, penetrating Web2 AI and getting like a consortium of, I think we're stronger in numbers, right? We're still a pretty small industry, even though we're very tribal. But if anyone out there is also thinking about getting distribution into Web2, whether it's through VARs, through system integrators, through consultants, or accelerators, all that stuff, would love to kind of team up. I think there's only so much a single team can do, but as I said, I think there's strength in numbers, and I think it'll be very important. There's a huge need for the cost savings, the security, the privacy, and Web2 has no idea this exists. Everyone I talk to, they're like, really? And so anyone like kind of thinking about that effort, please reach out.
Yeah, let's bridge that gap. All right, David, it's been really interesting talking with you. I'm sure that my audience is going to get a lot out of this conversation. Yeah, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Had a good time.
All right, well, that was a great conversation that I really enjoyed. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure you did as well. If you have any questions for me or David, you can get in touch with us on X. I am at Thomas Maybrier, and David is at @AtterX_. I'd encourage you to get in touch, not just about today's episode, but if you've got suggestions, questions, comments, or ideas for future guests or topics we could cover on the show, definitely get in touch with me. So, 2 last things before we go today. I'd like to ask you for your support. If you could please give this episode a thumbs up, rate the show wherever you get it. If you're watching on X, give us a repost or reply. All of this will really help us to grow the show and reach new people. Additionally, if you want to share the show with a friend, colleague, or family member that you think would get something out of it, I'd really appreciate it. All right, that's all I've got for you today. This has been the Agents Unleashed podcast. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.